The video begins with Russian troops launching an attack with a locomotive train towards the Donetsk region. The locomotive was equipped with various weapons and also carried a large number of Russian infantry ready for combat. This attack was quite creative and effective because the train was protected from several types of bullets, even heavy caliber ones. However, it could not overcome attacks via Ukrainian drones. A locomotive was seen by a Ukrainian drone stopping in the middle of the tracks. Not waiting long, Ukrainian troops prepared several FPV drones to carry out attacks. Several attacks hit the target. Russian troops were forced to abandon the train. Ukrainian intelligence provided information that the number of Russian soldiers was 6. They immediately looked for shelter. However, the Ukrainian army had prepared another kamikaze drone to fly there. The kamikaze drones were sent to chase them, not letting them get close to the Ukrainian positions. With a shortage of numbers, the strength of the Russian troops gradually decreased. Not only that, the Ukrainian army also prepared more drones. This time, the target was the Russian infantry hideout. For a while, there were still Russian troops who survived and tried to escape. However, this time, the Ukrainian forces are not using kamikaze drones, but also multi-purpose drones, armed with ammunition for precise dropping on targets. From Ukrainian positions, drones were launched one by one, and attacked Russian hideouts again, locations that had been previously identified through reconnaissance. Explosions continued to occur one after another without stopping. Finally, the last of the Russians threw down his armor and weapons and surrendered, realizing this was his only chance of survival. A drone began escorting him along the way, as the Ukrainians were going to take the man for questioning, and did not want to put their colleagues, who had come to transport him, at unnecessary risk. Then Ukrainian troops immediately drove towards him, picked him up, and left the dangerous area. Following this incident, Russian forces launched a massive offensive southward, involving hundreds of infantrymen and dozens of armored vehicles. At approximately 6 p.m., Russian forces launched an attack near the settlements of Piatikatki, Stepov, Lobkov, Mala Tokmachka, and Mali Sherbaki. At least 320 soldiers, 3 tanks, approximately 40 armored vehicles, and dozens of trains participated in the attack. The attack also involved several regiments from the 58th Combined Arms Army of the Southern Military District of the Russian Federation. Thanks to aerial reconnaissance, Ukrainian forces detected enemy movements in advance and launched an attack with drones and artillery. The first attack on Russian equipment occurred 8 kilometers before the line of contact. The battle lasted more than 2.5 hours. As a result, the Ukrainian armed forces destroyed 29 pieces of equipment and 140 operators, and 3 more Russian tanks were damaged. Soldiers of the 14th Brigade of the Ukrainian National Guard, Chervona Kalina, also successfully repelled a large-scale mechanized attack by Russian forces on the Pokrovsk front line, resulting in the loss of over 240 Russian soldiers. Russia deployed a significant amount of equipment to the battlefield. This time, it consisted primarily of armored fighting vehicles and motorcycles, along with nearly 2 companies of personnel. However, the Ukrainian soldiers who held their ground demonstrated true professionalism and resilience. Initial reports from the battlefield indicate Russian losses totaled over 240 soldiers killed and wounded, and over 100 pieces of equipment destroyed, including 96 motorcycles, 21 armored fighting vehicles, 2 cars, and 2 artillery systems. The Ukrainian Defense Forces also successfully repelled a large-scale enemy attack in the Severski sector. Several units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces participated in the repelling, including the 30th and 54th Mechanized Brigades and the 81st Airmobile Brigade. In the attack on the defensive positions, the Russians used not only tanks and armored personnel carriers, but also trains, ATVs, and light motorized vehicles. Around 20 pieces of equipment were involved, and detection was not difficult, as the attack took place in open fields, with thick clouds of dust billowing behind the vehicles. Furthermore, the attackers used thermal imaging equipment to conceal their troop movements. However, the Defense Forces' aerial reconnaissance tracked the Russian military column early on and adjusted its fire accordingly. The Russians began to suffer their first losses from the Ukrainian Defense Forces' artillery systems, which targeted Russian troops with conventional and cluster munitions. Mines also played a significant role, slowing the attack due to the loss of vehicle movement. As a result, the Russian infantry was forced to move quickly, in confusion, freeze in place, or run into nearby forest belts for cover. Despite persistent attempts to attack, Russia was unable to launch an active offensive. On their own front, they achieved only a few successes towards Vyimka. From the beginning of the offensive, the Russian convoy was constantly tracked by Ukrainian reconnaissance drones. The convoy was immediately hit by artillery fire and drone strikes. As a result, Russian vehicles were stuck in one place. Damaged vehicles blocked the canal crossing. Russian infantry, dismounted, tried to hide in houses but were killed by drones. At least 14 vehicles were burned or abandoned on the battlefield. Initial estimates of enemy losses in personnel reached at least 33 soldiers killed and wounded. Ukrainian forces also successfully halted a major Russian offensive on the Zaporizhzhia front line, destroying 3 of their armored vehicles. Russia reportedly attempted a major breakthrough on one of the front lines in Zaporizhzhia Oblast. The effort involved 3 tanks, 18 infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, and 41 motorcycles. The fierce attack continued throughout the day, from morning until evening. Units of the 17th Brigade of the Ukrainian National Guard, based in Poltava, along with other units of the Defense Forces, acted swiftly and efficiently. Thanks to accurate fire and a timely response, the attack was successfully halted. According to confirmed reports, Ukrainian forces destroyed 2 infantry fighting vehicles and 1 armored personnel carrier, killing 6 Russian soldiers and wounding 11 others. In general, most armored vehicles were hit, including troops and their crews.